Hi, this is Jill Varvel. You're listening to DixieCast, Southern Comfort for Your Ears. When I started this podcast, my goal was to feature interesting people and places of the American South. Although I try to keep things apolitical, in this currently divided world that we're living in today, sometimes that's impossible. But there are many people on both the left and the right who are not seeking political division. Rather, they're trying to educate the public on social, economic, and political movements that affect us all, regardless of our ideological persuasions. One of the people that I've been blessed to discover is former University of Tulsa professor and grassroots organizer Dr. Julianne Romanello. After noticing corporate language infiltrating her educational institution, she began documenting the technocratic trends of the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the dangers of impact investing and public-private partnerships. Ultimately quitting her job and starting the website heartsoverhexagons.com, she's focused on educating the public and building nonpartisan advocacy movements to lobby local and state politicians. Her work very much influenced my decision to move to the American South, as she effectively explained the mechanisms of corruption that I personally found myself fighting on the West Coast. Moreover, Dr. Romanello is proving that American Southerners are more capable and receptive to stopping this encroaching tyranny and providing a model of peaceful and political resistance to the rest of the United States. So how did I discover Dr. Romanello? Well, I first came across her videos when I still lived in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula. My family moved from California to Washington in 2015, seeking a quieter life in a small farm town where we could homestead and not worry about the misguided progressivism that was running rampant in much of California. However, soon after moving, the sleepy coastal town became increasingly divided over a proposed drug treatment clinic, which was funded by the state government through the allocation of federal funds and managed by the local Native American tribe. While the causes of drug abuse are complex and the solutions are nuanced, I found myself most interested in the political mechanism by which the facility was being built and financed. Despite the relative wealth of the community, certain parts had been designated economic opportunity zones, which is a federal designation created by the Bush Jr. administration and implemented under Obama's tenure. This meant that geographically determined disenfranchised communities were eligible to receive special financing for businesses that provided a social good or an economic boost for a specified group. On paper, this appeared to be a very reasonable program, much like USDA loans or affirmative action for schools. It was intended to benefit a specific group, an underserved community. However, the more that I looked into it, the less charitable and the more corporately captured it seemed. I found reports written about these economic opportunity zones in literature by the Federal Reserve. They explain that the entities created could be partnered with corporations below the 50% ownership threshold, and after a few years of operation could be sold to these corporations in whole. Thus, it would appear that the revitalization would not remain in the hands of the local communities that it was billed to help. Instead, it could be purchased by the highest bidder. As a realtor, I studied the respective property values of the areas deemed economic opportunity zones, and I found that they rarely correlated to impoverishment. Rather, they were often prime pieces of real estate that had business development potential. Often the lack of internet or cell phone coverage could qualify these areas, despite the fact that they were often wealthy retirees who sought to move to these areas due to their isolation. In short, the entire push for these programs to me seemed questionable. As I continued to research, I began to notice more and more corporate doublespeak and hidden intentions. The provided drug treatment of methadone and Suboxone had been redubbed medicated assisted treatment, or MAT, to obfuscate the fact that they were opiate-based treatments for opiate addictions. In some cases, the medications were being manufactured by the same pharmaceutical companies that exacerbated addictions by encouraging overprescription. Though labeled safe and effective, significant abuse potential existed as evidenced by studies, news stories, and personal accounts of former users. Similarly, local politicians and advocacy groups bandied about the claim that all the scientific literature concluded that this mat was a gold standard for drug treatment. While some studies use that characterization, I discovered that the main progenitor of this language was the Open Society Institute, which is a non-scientific NGO with notable ties to the United States State Department and the pharmaceutical industry. Finally, it was revealed that the local tribe would be compensated for these treatments through Medicaid reimbursements that were over 1,000% what a private provider could receive. The more I looked, the more problems appeared. And so I began researching other buzzwords that I came across. I soon learned about sustainability, impact investing, economic justice, public-private partnerships, and many other catchphrases seemingly independently used by governments, NGOs, and corporations. Yet, the more that I looked, the more it appeared that large moneyed interests were coordinating programs and policies through this shared language. And that's how I discovered Dr. Julianne Romanello and her extensive documentation of the perils of inclusive capitalism. Recently, this information has broken into the mainstream as more and more people have become familiar with the catchphrase, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, as promoted by Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. But Dr. Julianne Romanello has been covering this movement for a few years now. While looking to see if anyone else has discovered this hidden language, I found her video NWO/4IR Buzzwords Part 1, which I've included a link to below. As a former lecturer and philosophy PhD, she provides compelling, well-organized breakdowns of this corporate doublespeak that anyone can understand. I've recommended this video to many of my friends and family to understand how these memes have been so quickly pushed into the population. Dr. Romanello goes much deeper from there. Her overview of inclusive capitalism, parts 1 and 2, explains the mechanisms of how this hidden language is used to communicate agendas within the government and nonprofit milieu and slowly acclimate the public to the principles of what is termed stakeholder or inclusive capitalism. Similarly, her video Testing Resilience, Inclusive Capitalism further showcases how this program has metastasized in the wake of COVID-19. To summarize her work, the goal of track and trace goes beyond COVID-19 and medical purposes. Rather, it's an attempt to catalog human capital so corporations can monitor and mold workers around the world into more effective machines. It's dystopian, it's deceptive, but it's intentionally dry. Yet Julianne has managed to unveil the language and captivate audiences online and in person. Most recently, she gave an address in her hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, where she summarizes what is being done and what we can do to fight back against the corporate capture of the nation. But don't take my word for it. Check out Julianne's website, her YouTube, and her very active Facebook page. It's up to citizens to network, to organize, and to lobby their local politicians. But to do that, we must first examine the words that they try to use against us. Julianne is based in Oklahoma, and while I'm in Arkansas, there is a growing momentum across America's heartland to resist this corporate and nonprofit overreach and re-strengthen our state and our local governments. Often both sides of the aisle criticize government and politicians as being irredeemable, yet Julianne takes a more charitable and pragmatic approach. Whether witting or unwitting, our politicians and bureaucrats are capable of changing course and better representing their constituents. Often they're simply uninformed. It's with this grace that we as individuals are capable of changing hearts and minds. So again, I encourage my listeners to check out Dr. Romanello's work and send it to our families and our friends who might be interested in understanding how the world is being changed around us, who is doing it, and what we can do to reverse that course. Thank you for tuning in to DixieCast. Come back next week for another heaping helping of Southern comfort for your ears. This is Jill Varvel. We'll see you next week.